Hello all, another interview with Age with Care, and this time with Kyle Hulsebos, who has a very interesting topic in my eyes. But as usual, I start with the question. Kyle, what are your thoughts about aging healthily?
Well, first of all, good morning. And as far as my thoughts on aging health, I think it's wise first for me to define health the way that I use it. And if I break the word down that goes back to the old English roots, it becomes of two parts. It starts with heal and it ends with th. And if we translate that to modern English, the th part at the end of health comes across as something being a state of or a condition of. And heal was then translated as being wholeness. So the word health itself is actually a state of or a condition of wholeness.
Okay.
And the old medical dictionary definition, they've changed it and updated it, but the old definition used to be that health is a state of wholeness in which all the organs of the body function together at 100%, 100% of the time. So if we're going to use that definition, which is the way I use things, and then we talk about age, and age, even if we break the word down, goes back to basically means something from Latin as going through time. It, when we talk about healthy aging, then what we're really talking about is how to have wholeness through time. So when I'm talking about healthy aging, I'm thinking, how do we make sure we're as masterful and empowered in our lives as we travel through our lives, through time, in order to express this wholeness. And then I can even get into the idea of wealth, which was a state of well-being, and have that and utilize that throughout our lives up until the very end, effectively.
And the way you see it, it's probably through all stages of life. It's not just aging when you are when you're old, but when you are getting older. So it starts probably at a very young age.
Right. The idea of age, if you go back to the Latin roots of it, that was simply a process that we go through. As a matter of fact, I was just reading a book where they were trying to work on a definition of life, and life was defined in there as a dynamic process.
Hmm.
The idea of older or elder comes from a completely different root, and that implies the idea of losing ability and actually where we're breaking down and grain and that type of idea.
Yeah,
Very different from aging, though they're now very synonymous
yeah,
these days.
yeah, yeah. I get what you mean. We'll get more into that, but first, Kyle, introduce yourself. What's your name? What do you do? What is your daily practice?
Well, I'm Dr. Kyle Hulsebos, and I am a doctor of chiropractic here in Northern Illinois, outside Chicago. And I'm a third generation chiropractor. My grandfather started in practice in 1949.
Wow.
And so it was 71 years this year. We did a nice 70-year celebration.
Hmm.
And we're a very traditional practice. I'm in practice with my wife, my brother, and my father. My a couple of my cousins practice. My uncles, who are retired, practice. It's a very large family. We have one of the larger practices in the U.S.
Yeah.
Uh, and in addition to being a busy hands-on doctor, I also, with my wife, we do speaking, and we do consulting with people one-on-one. We do groups that we work with. We're also prolific in different types of writing. My wife's an artist, so we're very uh, eclectic people, I
Yeah.
would say.
Yeah. And is your grandfather still alive?
And my grandfather passed away 25 years ago.
Ah.
So I didn't get to practice with him, but I do see many of his patients that
Hmm.
are still alive and still come in for care regularly.
That's so great. That's really fantastic.
Yeah.
Um, In an earlier conversation we had, you were mentioning 7 stages, 7 areas of life. What do you
Correct.
mean by that?
Well, I'm a student of Dr. John Demartini, and the way he defines areas of life is that there's 7 areas, and not stages, but 7 areas to empower, 7 areas to work toward mastery to the whole, and it goes back to that idea of health and wholeness. And the areas that we and 7 is not completely arbitrary. He took it from a different source, which I can't remember the name of, but I find I like it, and seven's a lovely number, so I stick with it. The 7 areas of life we look at are your spiritual area, your mental empowerment, your vocational or job or life service empowerment, your financial area of life. We have a family area of life, which can involve your larger family, your adopted family, your spouse, your children, and your social area of life. And the social area, of course, is your leadership role. It's a little bit what you're doing right here with your show. Uh, Certainly affecting more people out there and on different levels. And then the physical area of life, which is where, as a chiropractor, I will focus a majority of my time, though I hit on all 7 areas when we do consults with people in order to, if one area is weak, the other areas will start to show
Yeah,
it after a while.
yeah. I read a book not too long ago. I forgot the writer, but he thinks there are 10 areas,
Okay.
but it I think it covers what
Certainly.
you say, but just a little bit extended. But
Yeah, there's
yeah,
many areas, ways of looking at it.
yeah,
7 is just the way I prefer.
yeah, of course, yeah. Um, yeah, I wrote down how do those areas connect to the principles of health, but you have already explained a little bit about that, and that if you don't give enough attention to one area, that the rest will suffer as well. What for me is interesting, I see a chiropractor as somebody who is only, yeah, kind of massaging, or it's probably said totally the wrong way, but that's my layman point of view. So how did you end up with all these different areas?
I am a very I have a very high value in my life on learning as much as possible,
Mm,
and I have studied many different things. If you look over my shoulder, I've got that's my current reading list behind my shoulder there. And I probably cover 10 or 15 subjects just in there.
mm,
I have a very my father is a philosopher, and many of my family are philosophers, and chiropractic itself was based on a philosophy and certain principles, the principles of health, and it's been an interest to me for many years. So delving into it, and then being able to go through and meet these different teachers that said, here's different ways to empower the health in people, more than just by adjusting the spine, by making sure the nervous system is free and clear and functioning at 100%. Aside from just the physical part, what are we doing to make sure that the people have 100% uh, health, as it were? And that's under learning that definition of health when I was 14 from my father, that health is a state of wholeness, and all the organs of the body function together in wholeness at 100%, 100% of the time. So when I learned that, oh, there are 7 areas of life, or 10, or 8, or however you want to arbitrarily do it, if all of those are not at 100%, you don't have health. So while in my chiropractic practice, I'm certainly aiding people in their physical expression of health, and there is enough documentation and understanding that there are emotional, mental aspects to adjusting the spine and improving that
mm,
function. There was more to it, and it made me, and then if my wife also, who's very much very spiritual and very into the healing arts, she is also added into that for me. So I had a lot of influences around to sort of expand.
Yeah.
Uh,
Yeah. It's such a pity that I didn't know you. Well, back then you weren't a chiropractor, probably, but I did use the experiences of a chiropractor when I was still living in Holland. But I think it's 20 years ago. But I didn't like it. It was just,
Really?
yeah. Let's say the movement and go. So yeah. Your opinion about it appeals much more to me. So it's very good. But yeah, what I'm of course very interested in is you have certain ideas about immortality. Is it even something we should strive for, or yeah, what are those ideas exactly?
Let me back up a little bit. When I was doing my research into healthy aging and into longevity, uh, and that again is taking that idea of aging and elder and separating them. I read a number of different texts and a number of different authors' ideas, and there's some fascinating, phenomenal research out there, and some is conflicted, some is false. But I tried to get the most in-depth researchers, the greatest, I would say, the greatest researchers and minds on the topic. One of those was Dr. Elizabeth Blackburn, and she is a Nobel Prize winner. She and her team are the ones who, I believe, with two other Nobel Prize winners that worked with her, they discovered an enzyme in the human body called telomerase. And inside in to break it down, you've got a whole body in front of us, and your body is comprised of multiple systems. Each one of those systems is comprised of multiple organs. The organs are comprised of multiple specific tissues. Each tissue is a grouping of different cells. And inside each one of those cells, each cell effectively is its own little living creature. And within each one, they have their own type of brain we call a nucleus. And within there, you have something called a chromosome. Now, a chromosome you may understand and heard of, that is just a twist up and winding and bundle of DNA. And that's the genetic blueprint. That's the one that says this is how we're going to put things together when we build. And they're slightly different for each cell structure, obviously, because it has different things. Kind of like the walls and the windows are different in your house. And when a cell needs to divide, when we need to make more cells, what happens is that chromosome splits and doubles itself in order to make two nucleuses, and then it just builds it effectively in a very simplistic form. It rebuilds another cell around it. Now, the one thing that we didn't understand until they did all this research was every time the cell splits, that wound up bundle of DNA has a cap on it, the same as the cap at the end of your shoelace. And that cap at the end of your shoelace, called an adit, that is there to stop your shoelace from unraveling. And so we have the same thing on our DNA, and that's called a telomere. And a telomere is telos, coming from the Greek, meaning end, and it was there in order to stop that from unraveling. Well, every time the cell was dividing, that telomere gets eroded and shaved off a little bit. And if it gets eroded too much, you can no longer unravel the DNA, or split the DNA, because it will unravel. And if it unravels, then you have chaos and the cell dies, and it's not going to do that. But it can no longer divide. And what Dr. Blackburn and these researchers and previous researchers that led them to this discovered is that when it finally hits that stage where that telomere is too short in order for it to divide, it will no longer divide, and then the cell effectively is dead, and they call that senescence. And senescence has the same root word as senile, meaning exactly, so meaning that it's not stupid and forgotten, but it's sort of, as Dr. David Sinclair, another researcher coined it. He said they're like zombie cells. They're dead but undead. And they said this cell then becomes like a rotten apple in a barrel. And if we stick a rotten apple in a barrel, it's going to have toxins that come out and poisons, and it's going to start spoiling other apples. And in that case, other cells will begin to get affected and they will get poisoned and they will become senescent in the same way. And if we do this over a number of decades or years to decades, that becomes what they call chronic disease. So you can have liver problems show up. You can have they're looking at that idea in part of the research into Alzheimer's and into pulmonary fibrosis, these very chronic conditions that come up that are age related conditions. So what Dr. Blackburn and her team discovered was an enzyme called telomerase. And if we activate this enzyme, it actually helps restore the telomere so that the cell can continue to divide and does not become senescent. She was very clear in her book, however, that this will not make you live forever, but it will make it so you have greater life through the course of your lifespan.
Mm-hmm.
Does that make sense?
But then the big question is, of course, how do you influence that yourself?
Well, we'll get into that. Let me continue on this idea of immortality.
Sorry.
So that's the next question I asked. And now, if I go from Dr. Blackburn's book, and she was very clear in there that you have she actually laid it out very well, and this may be something within that community or her. I don't know if she came up with this, but what she put in there was we have a lifespan. We have, if you go into the spiritual traditions, we could say that you have a number of breaths, or that God wrote it in the book. The Nordic Viking people, obviously, they said their fate was determined. They knew the day they would die, the day they were born. It was about how you live, that type of thing. So we have a lifespan, and the scientists are fairly agreeable on there's a finite number within our mortal life. But within that, you have a health span and you have a disease span. And the key here is to make sure that your health span is as long as the lifespan. And what happens to many people, we see this quite a bit here in the United States. I don't know what it is in Europe, but we'll have a great number of people that get into their 60s and 70s and they have lost their health and they are now in disease, and they may be alive for 20 more years,
Yep.
but they're not living very well. So the idea of the telomeres and the telomerase and activating that and eliminating this problem in the cells, or at least expressing greater health and wholeness, that's to increase that health span throughout our lifespan. And their research did say that you may have lost something, but you can always do more work in the meantime to get it as healthy an expression as possible.
Mm-hmm.
Now, in contrast to that, I read a book called Lifespan by Dr. David Sinclair. And David Sinclair is a fantastic researcher in aging. He's one of the world experts on aging.
Mm-hmm.
And he says that age is a disease itself and that it's curable. And he even claims that we are going to be able to figure out how to prevent death. And he did say in there a very bold claim that the first person that's going to live to be 1,000 years is already alive today.
Oh, that's him.
And so but the way he looks at it is there's going to be drug treatments for it. There are going to be different things we can take and do in order to increase that. Now, that's fascinating to me on the sense that, is that going to allow us to travel to other stars? That may be the type of research we need.
Mm-hmm.
But my underlying way that I view this and teach people about it is, I don't think you could ever prove immortality, because you'd have to live for infinity. And you would never know if you succeed. If you die one day, you failed.
Yeah.
So it's more, there is definite research out there that states we are going to have longer and longer lifespans. It's already happening. it's certainly in the industrialized countries, and there's a lot of research there to do it. But the key is personally, I don't want to live to be 200 years old, but my body quits on me when I'm 104.
Yeah.
So that mine has been more about, okay, we can create immortality, but I want to make sure that in my mortal life here, we've created a great life too to look back at. So immortality to me is certainly you can have the longevity, the mortal longevity in there, but true immortality, as far as I've seen, has been some of these immortal messages that I've read, and I've studied Socrates, and I've studied Plato and Aristotle, and I've studied Einstein's works and Newton's and Giordano Bruno and Copernicus. And these people so far thus have proved that they have immortal messages. These are things that have lived well beyond their lifetime. The impact has been huge. If you're Christian, the impact of Jesus Christ has obviously had a very far-reaching effect. If you're Muslim, the impact of the Prophet Muhammad has had a very, very influential and far-reaching effect. And there's many things. And even if we look at the Hindu traditions that have been around since the Vedic scriptures for thousands of years, immortality is more than just living your body forever. It's a concept of, can you create something beyond yourself?
Yeah. Well, that's an interesting point of view. What do you leave behind, if I understand you correctly? But I also like your idea of you have a lifespan and you have a health span, because it's something I thought about but wasn't able to express. So that's really great.
Yeah, when I came across the concept, I said, well, there's the entire lecture in 3 words.
Yeah. You were mentioning, I have to read this because otherwise I make mistakes. You have been mentioning Demartini earlier in this conversation, but you said you are a Demartini Method facilitator.
Correct.
So what is that?
So part of what Dr. John Demartini created a method, and it's something that is teachable, and many, I think there's about 3,000 of us out there that are facilitators of this. And what the Demartini method is in the way I explain it to people, is it's very similar to getting a specific chiropractic adjustment, except instead of a physical adjustment, it's mental. And we have these emotions and perceptions about things that weigh us down and weigh down on us. When you're chronically mad at somebody, it makes you feel bad, and you can make yourself sick worrying, or being angry at somebody. These things have been measured. And things like grief is a perceptual issue that certainly ages you, and can make you elder. So what we work, and then at the same time, there's people that we put up on pedestals and say we could never achieve that, and we block ourselves from achieving it. And that's a perceptual issue. So what we do as facilitators is we work with people one-on-one, or in some cases in groups, and lecture on it and take them through. And it's work. It's real work and consulting that we do. But what we're doing is we're using specific set of questions through an algorithm to take you through each perception you have and adjust it and balance it so that it no longer blocks you and actually helps empower you. And that's part of what I utilize to get people to mastery and empowerment and health in the 7 areas of life.
Wow. Yeah, it sounds very good. It's a pity you're all the way in the States.
Well, with that type of care, I can do it right over on Skype, so we don't need to be in person for that.
Oh, okay. Well, there must be people. You spoke like a true scientist, which I love. So that's really impressive. And I understand that you don't have a website. You are on Facebook, but not very much, I have noticed. But if people want to reach out to you, how do they do that?
The best way I would tell people to reach out to me right now is we can give out my email, and
It's this one, isn't it?
That is the one. Probably I need to hire a personal assistant one day, but well, we're working on getting adding up to the website. There's certainly a website for my practice, but that only helps you so much if you live within driving distance of me.
Yeah.
But there's certainly, you can reach me there, and I'm happy to answer questions. And if people did want to do any type of consult, I could sit and work with them, and we could get on Zoom or Skype. But that's the best way right now until I find better.
Now, yeah, I'm really very enthusiastic about all the things that you shared. I wrote down a couple of things that I want to investigate more. It's
absolutely
really worthwhile to think about all the topics that you touched. You can't be extensive in a short interview like this, of course, but it's a really good start to think about all the ways in how things connect, and all the stuff that you shared. So I really want to thank you for.
If I could, really quick.
Yeah.
If you're going to take one, if I can tell you to please take one takeaway from this interview, the definition of health that I gave as a state of wholeness.
Yeah.
The definition of wealth is a state of well-being. And you take those two, you can apply them anywhere in any part of your life and say, how do I have more wholeness here? 100% parts and 100% function. It is very universal. I would like to make sure that's the biggest takeaway I think I can offer you.
Well, like I said, it's greatly said. So
thank you.
Well, thank you again, and goodbye, everybody. I hope that that you enjoyed it as much as I did. So bye. Take care.
Thanks for having me.